Welcome to Module 3, where we focus on PHAB accreditation and documentation best practices. This module will guide you through the process of documenting your child CHIP efforts in a way that not only meets PHAB standards, but also strengthens your overall public health practice. PHAB, short for the Public Health Accreditation Board, has developed a national framework that defines what high-quality public health practice looks like. Accreditation is not just about compliance, it's about improving performance, building trust, and creating stronger systems for community health. In this module, you'll learn how to align your child CHIP activities with accreditation expectations. We'll cover key PHAB domains, documentation tips, quality improvement strategies, and how to overcome common barriers faced by local health departments. By the end, you'll have a clearer path forward for both meeting PHAB standards and making your documentation work for you, not just for a review team. So there's some information on this slide that kind of gives you an overview of what PHAB is, why pursue it, how it relates to the child and the CHIP, is it required, which it isn't, and what are the main components. So there's 10 of them, and we focus on 1, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 10 here. So let's begin with the big picture, which is how PHAB accreditation actually works. This flowchart outlines the accreditation process from registration to site visit to reaccreditation. For most departments, this journey spans several years and includes a self-study, documentation submission, peer review, and continuous quality improvement. Your child CHIP process plays a foundational role here. PHAB domains 1 and 5 specifically require that you conduct a comprehensive community health assessment and use that information to drive a community health improvement plan. But even beyond those two domains, the child CHIP work you do informs how your department engages partners, communicates with the public, evaluates programs, and plans strategically. So aligning your child CHIP process with this flowchart gives you a head start on accreditation. It helps you stay organized and proactive. So now let's zoom in on the PHAB standards most relevant to child and CHIP. There are 12 domains in total, but for child and CHIP, domains 1, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 10 are especially important. Let's walk through the PHAB domains most critical to the child CHIP process. These domains represent the heart of community assessment, improvement planning, and public health performance. Even if your LHD isn't actively pursuing accreditation, aligning your child CHIP work with these domains strengthens your foundation and prepares you for future readiness. Domain 1 is about the community health design, community health assessment design, and the methods. It's directly tied to the CHA. Domain 4, partnerships and engagement, focuses on the system around us, our partners, stakeholders, and residents. The CHA and the CHIP isn't something we do alone. PHAB expects strong engagement across the system, including community-based organizations, hospitals, and residents. Domain 5 is mostly about community health improvement planning. Looks at how priorities from your CHA are translated into action. And PHAB wants to see that strategies are aligned to local priorities, supported by community partners, and clearly documented. So your CHIP becomes the operational plan that shows you're not just identifying issues, but you're addressing them. Domain 7 has a lot to do with addressing access barriers and equity. It's about making sure that everyone can access services and opportunities supporting health. So child CHIP process should reflect the experiences of underserved and underrepresented groups. So this is really big for equity. Domain 9, quality improvement, isn't something we do once, it's a cycle when we improve. Domain 9 emphasizes embedding quality improvement into your work, and child CHIP is a perfect example. As priorities evolve, your team should be assessing progress, revisiting goals, and refining strategies. Domain 10 is about the organizational infrastructure. It ensures that your internal systems, planning, evaluation, resource management, support all the work that you're doing. So this is a very strategic plan-oriented domain. So together, all these domains create the scaffolding for a high-quality accredited child CHIP process. You might already be fulfilling many of these standards in your work, and PHAB helps with documenting and aligning that work with best practices. And next, we'll take a closer look at Domain 5 and how to document your chip effectively as an example. So strong documentation is the bridge between your day-to-day work and strong accreditation success. When it comes to CHA chip, your documentation should do three things. It should reflect the process you followed, demonstrate how community voice was included, and show how the results were used to drive strategy. For example, did you use surveys and focus groups? Or did you keep summary reports and raw instruments? Did your prioritization process include scoring tools or decision matrices? Did your chip include smart objectives and timelines? Do you have working drafts, final plans, progress updates? You should remember that PHAB doesn't just want a polished final product. They want to see the thinking behind it. So when it comes to accreditation, it's not just about having documentation. It's about having the right documentation. Essential documentation for CHA chip includes clear evidence of your process, your partnerships, and your strategic decisions. This means capturing things like draft and final versions of your CHA chip, meeting agendas and minutes, community engagement summaries, prioritization tools and scorecards, implementation plans and evaluation measures. What ties it all together is intention. PHAB reviewers want to understand how you worked, not just what you produced. Think of each document as a window into your process. Together, they should show how your department applied public health principles in an organized, collaborative, and equitable way. So, building a documentation toolkit. It's more than just a filing system, even though a lot of it is just about keeping your files. It's your department's strategic foundation for CHA chip and PHAB alignment. But the purpose is simple: to create a structured, consistent way to collect, organize, and maintain the evidence you need throughout your CHA chip process. That way, when it's time to prepare for accreditation or simply report to your board or your other stakeholders, you already have what you need. Think of this as a living system too. Start by creating folders organized by domain or process stage, and build in file naming conventions, version control, and access protocols. This approach ensures you're not just compliant, but you're ready. So this slide here kind of has five things: planning and engagement, so keep track of all the work you do there. The assessment phase, try to maintain technical details about the kind of work you're doing. Improvement planning, again, keep just written documentation about what your chip is. So that should have action plans, should have objectives and strategies, timelines, responsible parties. Implementation and monitoring, so you should be able to look at progress reports, performance dashboards, what interventions were implemented, and what do you think the impact was, and QI work. And then ultimately you get to the point of policy development. So try to, if you have policy in place, what was the policy adoption process, and what was the policy, and are there any impact assessments or briefs demonstrating its effectiveness? And then coming back to just organizing your documentation, I touched briefly on this in the last slide. It's really important to have a central repository, so like a centralized digital storage system. Maybe that's just on OneDrive. I know some people use Google Drive, but try to have everything organized and accessible by people involved so that you're able to keep track of what's going on, and you're all putting it in the same place. Now that you have everything in the same place, you start running into people just having their own naming structures for things. Try to make sure your team is using consistent and descriptive file names with dates and document versions. While sometimes documents get updated, and we do keep track of that with like Office's new OneDrive, it's still nice to have the dates on there when you make a change, in case somebody makes significant changes to the document, so people don't have to go back and look at the versions before. Documentation logs. So trying to maintain a log or an index of all the documents, their locations, descriptions, and relevance to PHAB standards is a really useful thing to do. isn't something you'll do for everything, but it's something that you can do kind of occasionally to try to check in. And then on occasionally checking in regular updates. So just schedule maybe a quarterly or a twice a year review of your documentation related to accreditation, where you just kind of go through, you look at the measures, and you just say, okay, here's what we got for these. And then you talk about whether or not you should maybe update certain things. Sometimes that helps you stay ahead of it, so you're not doing too much all at once. Some more tips for effective documentation. Consistency, I mentioned that in the last one. Make sure there's uniformity in your documentation. So like I said, naming. Clarity, your documents, try to make them clear, concise, easily understandable by even external reviewers. So if like somebody that isn't doing the work can't understand what's in the document, that might create problems down the road when we're trying to revisit things and remember what was in there. Accessibility, ensure that your documentation is easily accessible to everybody that needs access to it. And then of course confidentiality, which sometimes makes accessibility a little more difficult. Make sure that you're protecting sensitive information with appropriate access controls and data protection. This is particularly important when you're analyzing raw data. So I just wanted to share an example here of a documentation log template. You don't have to use it, but these are the fields you might consider. Just a documentation title, and you might even put the whole file path in this field, so the folder and the file name, the PHAB domain and measure it ties to, description of the document's content, the date it was created, and then the date it was last updated. Again, the location or the link, so if it's on SharePoint or if it's in a folder, just trying to keep track of where that's at. A responsible party is nice for documents sometimes. Try to spread the wealth on that a little bit, so that people have clear responsibilities for maintaining it. But it's just really important to make sure things are kept up to date and not overwhelming. And then some notes, just whatever additional information or context. So you can just make an Excel file and then just use that as kind of a tracking document for everybody. And then another thing here that you might consider is a PHAB documentation checklist, like a Word document or a printable PDF. Something where you see all the PHAB standards and measures as they relate to specific things like char chip. So that's something I've been working on preparing, where it has the standards that are particularly important for char on the chip, and then the checklist for each of those items has the required documentation, some guidance on what to include, and the status as well. So maybe like a field in there for just documenting it's incomplete or it's pending. So now I thought I'd walk through a documentation example for domain 5, touching on the general points. So focusing on domain 5, one of the most directly relevant domains for child chip documentation. This domain emphasizes your health department's role in creating and implementing policies and plans that impact community health. It includes 2 standards. Standard 5.1 is about being a primary resource on public health policies and laws. This might involve tracking how your department supports legislation, gives input on ordinances, or serves as a technical expert in planning discussions. Standard 5.2 focuses on how you collaborate to develop and carry out your community health improvement plan. For both of these standards, PHAB wants to see documentation of your department's leadership, your collaborations, and your strategic follow-through. Your CHIP isn't just a plan, it's a demonstration of how you align vision with action. To meet Domain 5 requirements, your documentation should include the following components: a finalized CHIP with measurable goals and objectives, evidence of collaborative development, like agendas, attendance lists, or meeting notes, community engagement materials such as surveys, focus groups, partner input summaries, an implementation plan, so it includes assigned responsibilities and timelines. Sometimes the CHIP and the implementation plan are essentially the same document. And evaluation metrics and reports will show how progress is monitored and updated. Again, this can be in your CHIP. So if your CHIP is aligned with equity and built through partnerships, your documentation should show that. The clearer the story you tell, the stronger your case will be, not just for FAB, but for your own leadership and accountability. Here, I kind of listed out some common documentation examples. So documentation of meetings like agendas and sign-in sheets and minutes. The CHIP document itself, which has got the full comprehensive plan, priorities all the way through methods and strategies and responsible parties. Perhaps some policy materials, so like draft policies, advocacy materials, or records of policy adoption, and progress reports, so periodic updates on the CHIP implementation status. And then finally, evaluation reports, so assessing the effectiveness of your strategies and their impact on community health indicators. I've had many conversations about about indicators and the difficulty of changing them. And people have a hard time sometimes showing what the impact was on the community health indicator. So you might consider looking at a line of sight per se, which is if I affect one thing and that affects another thing, which affects another thing, at some point that cumulative effect should lead to a reduction in diabetes, for example. So diabetes is caused by a lot of different things. So if you want to reduce it, you have to impact a lot of different things. So if you make small impacts across the board, the cumulative impact of that might lead to change, but it won't necessarily lead to change in a 3-year time frame. So now let's explore how quality improvement, or QI, fits into your CHIP process. Embedding QI practices helps you go beyond planning into measurable, sustained improvement. FAB expects this kind of integration, and Domain 9 specifically focuses on your culture of continuous quality. You can apply QI methods during CHA to better understand root causes of health issues. You can use tools like a fishbone diagram or Pareto chart to dig deeper into disparities. In the CHIP, QI supports implementation. Use SMART objectives to create clear goals. Apply PDSA cycles to test small changes and improve quickly. Define performance indicators and review them regularly to guide your next steps. This also means building a culture of improvement across your department, training staff, celebrating wins, making time to reflect and adjust your strategies. So integrating quality improvement into our CHIP processes ensures that our efforts are not only strategic, but also adaptive and responsive to community needs. By embedding QI tools during the assessment phase, we can uncover underlying factors contributing to health issues. Developing SMART objectives within our CHIP allows for clear tracking of progress. Implementing PDSA cycles enables us to test interventions on a small scale before broader implementation. Continuous monitoring and evaluation ensures we stay on course and fosters a culture of continuous quality improvement, where, like I said, you celebrate your successes, you continue revisiting them and moving forward. I really wanted to re-emphasize these things. And I should say, you're not in this alone. There's a lot of excellent tools and frameworks to support your CHIP and QI work. You could start with the NACHO CHIP Toolkit. It includes step-by-step guidance, templates, and practical examples from health departments across the country. CDC's Community Health Assessment and Improvement Resources is another go-to. They provide planning frameworks, data tools, and facilitation strategies. Of course, reviewing the FAB standards and measures are your primary source for accreditation requirements. Refer to them often to ensure alignment and avoid surprises. And don't forget the MAP 2.0 framework if that's what you choose to use, which brings it all together with a community-driven, equity-centered process. Together, all these resources create a strong foundation for a successful and impactful CHIP cycle. Let's be honest, accreditation isn't always easy, especially when you're juggling the demands of a CHIP process on top of everything else. Common challenges we've heard from Nebraska include staff turnover, disrupting momentum and creating gaps in documentation, limited resources, meaning fewer hands, less time, constrained budgets, and unclear documentation expectations, especially when the FAB language sometimes feels technical or overwhelming or just outright confusing. Knowing these challenges up front gives you the chance to plan proactively. And the good news is there's tested strategies that can help overcome them. So here's a few solutions that I've found helpful when navigating child CHIP challenges. Cross-training staff, ensuring institutional knowledge doesn't disappear when someone leaves or retires. Leveraging community partnerships to expand your capacity for engagement, analysis, and implementation. Bring partners in. It's a collaborative process, so try to bring more people together, pool resources. That helps address limited resources and also staffing limitations. Use PHAB provided tools and mock reviews to clarify expectations before submitting documentation. So that's something that you can do when you're submitting your documentation. You can submit sometimes things early through PHAB. Also, you have a great community of practice here in Nebraska that you could work with. Break documentation tasks into phases, aligning with your child CHIP process, so you're collecting evidence gradually and not all at once. And also try to acknowledge equity as much as you can at every step. Always be thinking about where are there differences in what I'm looking at? Where are things that might be masked by this aggregation of our data? And then try to maintain contact with your partners. So sometimes MOUs or shared goals are easy. Sometimes a quick celebration or recognition makes it easy. Also, sometimes having co-leads from partner organizations might help address that. So many different ways, so many different strategies to address these challenges. They're not all going to work for everybody, but I hope that you find some of what I'm sharing here to be helpful, and we're going to revisit some of these things in future modules as well. So I thought it might be fun just to walk through a real-world example. So in 2020, there was a fictitious Prairie Plains Health Department serving a rural 3-county region, and they began their child CHIP process. And they encountered multiple barriers. So they had staff shortages, they had limited funding, they had unexpected demands of the COVID-19 response, and uncertainty about how to align with PHAB documentation expectations. But still, being the people they are in public health, they just said, we're going to try accreditation anyways. So they were up against turnover in key staff positions, meaning they were losing historical knowledge about how they did their job before. They had documentation gaps because of the staff turnover and limited resources. They had inconsistent partner engagement, partially due to pandemic fatigue, partially due to just relationships that need to be cultivated more with local stakeholders. And then confusion around PHAB measures. We've all read through, well, not all of us, but some of us have read through a lot of the PHAB documentation. And it can be very confusing, and it's a lot of material. So what did they do? Well, they decided they would do a cross-training. So they'd have multiple team members proficient in the child CHIP process. So that meant training together. Leveraging partnerships. They collaborate with their local hospitals and community organizations to ask them what kind of expertise and resources they had. And that helped enhance the quality of their assessment and plans. They used PHAB resources. So they engaged with PHAB's documentation guidance and participated in webinars. And then they implemented QI tools. So they tried to use Plan, Do, Study, Act as much as they could when they were doing interventions or making systems changes. So in theory, what happened there? What outcomes were achieved? Well, they had standardized documentation practices, looking at the PHAB standards, so things were well recorded, aligned with PHAB standards, and their child CHIP seemed to be very well documented. And they had improved staff capacity with the cross-training and the professional development and the webinars. They had a more resilient and knowledgeable team, not just one person, not just two, but even more. Successful accreditation. So they achieved PHAB accreditation because all their documentation was so good, because they brought everybody together and they worked together, and it was a team effort, and they made it through. And they did it with continuous improvement and collaboration. So what's the key takeaways here? A proactive planning. They knew there were challenges. They developed plans, redundancies, training multiple people. Engaged stakeholders. They built partnerships with their hospitals and other community partners to try to maximize their available resources in the community so more people could have an impact. And then continuous learning. They applied QI Plan, Do, Study, Act, so that they didn't assume that they knew, they just kept meeting on it. So wrapping up Module 3, we focused on PHAB accreditation and best practices for documenting your work. The big takeaways from Module 3 are quality improvement isn't a separate process. It should be embedded into your CHOT from the beginning. When you do this, your work becomes more strategic, measurable, and aligned with PHAB standards. Challenges are common: staff turnover, limited documentation, unclear expectations. You can overcome these barriers though: cross-training, smarter organization, leveraging community partnerships. And finally, documentation matters. Keep a clear, accessible, and well-maintained record of your work. So if you're ready to take action, here's a few suggested next steps. Start building or refining your CHOT documentation toolkit. Review your current documentation. Make sure you've identified clear roles and responsibilities. And talk with your team about how you can begin embedding quality improvement into your work. So we'll have a quiz. I put some downloadable handouts and additional resources in the Learn Worlds platform. In Module 4, we'll dive into data, where to get it, how to manage it, how to visualize it in a way that informs decision making. We'll explore key sources of CHA data, tips for data storytelling, ways to build dashboards. So get ready to sharpen your analytics skills and explore tools that can take your CHA work to another level, hopefully. All right, thank you.